Hey, what's going on, Ape Nation? Hope you guys are having a great day. I'm going to try and rush through this because this is going to be a longer video. I'm going to give my thoughts on what we're listening to. This is The Swap. It's a podcast that is pushed out by ISDA pretty inconsistently, actually, but when they do push it out, I try to make sure that I listen. The specific topic here is DLT, which is distributed ledger technology, which they're talking about for, in most cases, they're talking about for crypto derivatives, right? Which is jumping into, all the banks are jumping into. If we think crypto manipulation is bad, or we think that leverage is being used there, wait till they get full access to the derivative market. But there is some kind of shining light from that. So we're going to dive into it. I'm just going to go ahead and start the podcast, and we're going to pause as I see fit to kind of give my own thoughts. But again, this is going to be a longer video, so I do want to preface you guys for that.
Well, we really appreciate it, and it was great to see so many of you in person once again. If you were at the AGM, you'll know the growth of the crypto derivatives market was a prominent theme. We heard from a number of crypto firms, traditional financial institutions, and regulators on the opportunities and challenges for this asset class. We also discussed the progress ISDA is making on developing specific contractual standards for the OTC crypto derivatives market. In this episode, we're going to delve down into the technology underlying the crypto market, distributed ledger. Specifically, we'll look at how this technology is currently being used and which parts of the derivatives market stand to benefit the most. I'm here with ISDA's CEO, Scott O'Malia. And Scott, can you explain why we're discussing this topic now?
Sure. As you said, we talked a lot about crypto at the AGM and the coins and the services, but we really didn't talk so much about the underlying technology. DLT doesn't just underpin the crypto market, but it also has the potential to revolutionize financial markets by bringing a lot more automation and efficiency to what is a very resource-intensive back office process.
Okay, so he's saying, number one, that they see a bunch of huge benefits for using it in the crypto space, but also the financial space, saying that a lot of it is back office style of procedures, like outdated ways of doing things, which doesn't make sense, being that the technological climate that we're in that exists, right? So these are the people that handle all the derivative markets, which we think is a major component of how us apes are getting screwed, and they're using outdated technology. Things are still done on paper. It's very easy to make mistakes when it comes to collateral management. We're going to get into all that.
Now, just looking at the current processes for managing collateral, it's complex, highly manual, and prone to error. Unbelievably, fax machines are still used in some cases.
Prone to error, and in some cases, and this is when it comes to managing collateral, guys, things that are preventing people from getting margin called, they are still using fax machines in some cases. Okay, this isn't some old, podcast. This was released on the 16th of June.
We think there's a strong case for overhauling how things are being done, and we're thinking about the future. The next question is, how does DLT figure into this future?
Well, we have a great guest who can really give us the ins and outs of distributed ledger and blockchain, Yuval Ruz. Yuval is co-founder and CEO of technology firm Digital Asset. Prior to becoming CEO, he served as CFO and Chief Operating Officer of the company. Before Digital Asset, Yuval held positions at Citadel and DRW Trading, so he brings a really great perspective on how technology is changing derivatives markets.
Okay, so that's interesting. So this guy that's giving his insight on why this is beneficial did previously work at Citadel. He's worked at a bunch of different high-end financial institutions, but this guy is coming from experience at Citadel. And I do want to say that doesn't mean that somebody is necessarily bad because they worked at a fund. He may have not liked it. He may have wanted to bet on something new. Obviously, this guy's pushing for, distributed DLT. So, that brings transparency, lower settlement times, et cetera, if it gets pushed to the actual traditional financial markets. So I try not to hold that against him too much. Let's carry on.
So, Scott, I'll hand it straight over to you.
Hey, Yuval, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
So let's talk a little bit about the derivatives market. As you know, derivatives markets are riddled with legacy systems that are often complex, highly manual, paper-based, and not easily interoperable.
Okay, so they're not easily interoperable and they're paper-based. So They're hard to work between firms, between two different institutions. There's a lot of room for error to happen is what my takeaway from that is.
Contracts and distributed ledger technology have the potential to revolutionize these processes and make them more efficient. Which areas of the market do you see the biggest opportunity for this potential disruption? And even if it's not disruption, how do you think about the evolution of these markets from a technology standpoint?
Yeah, so first of all, I think that, a lot of people like to talk about disruption because disruption is cool. We like to see ourselves as enablers for those that have a vision how to improve markets, to be the ones that improve markets. And as a result of that, there are players that get disrupted that don't agree with the vision or are too slow to react to changes. And I think that that's not unique to this technology. I think that that's just true to any technology trend. You touched on the derivative markets. They are large and they are super critical. I would say they are not unique in they're full of manual processes, no standardization, no interoperability. I think this is pretty similar trend that we see in many other markets in financial services and actually also in different industries. I think that one of the very interesting opportunity is OTC derivatives. And actually, I would say that your organization have pioneered really thinking about how this technology, especially smart contracts, can bring some of this standardization. One thing that people should not be mistaken when they hear standardization is that it doesn't mean that all legacy systems have to be replaced with new infrastructure, but it's really standardizing the interaction and the processing across different counterparties.
So, pausing there, the reason why it's such a big deal, again, what he's saying is because what firms will do is it's expensive, right, to kind of jump onto a new wave of technology. So a lot of these guys will freak the hell out if they're saying, "Oh shit, we got to go to our back end and change everything." So he's saying, "Hey, we don't necessarily have to replace all the legacy stuff, but what we can do is make it so when rules are defined, when contracts are set up, when exchanges of, when derivative trades are happening, that we as two financial institutions that are engaging in these trades can talk and get the correct information. There's not all these errors and stuff. There's not anything to get messed up or to get hidden." I think it goes with both ways, right? I mean, basically, when you have this going on and stuff can get lost in translation, that's when you have abuse happen. So I think that's important to remember. Anyways, we're going to carry on.
Every organization should still have the ability to process in-house in their own ways, but there should be an agreement. And I think that really where is the CDM has tried to lead the market to is really saying, well, we shouldn't just standardize how do we communicate with one another, what is the trade detail, but we should also agree how we're going to process the asset on each other's side. And I think leave that implementation to each organization. And I think that that's really a very good example of how this technology could bring standardization and as a result a lot of efficiency by reducing breaks which are happening daily.
Well, thank you for the nice plug on CDM. That's absolutely right. We're trying to establish that common taxonomy in which we describe life cycle events so everybody is working off the same page and doing so in a consistent fashion. And then we let innovators, whether it's your firm or other firms, take that standard and scale solutions that are automated, cost effective, et cetera. So we're excited about that. We are very focused on two applications right now. One is the digital reg reporting. Regulators are changing their regulatory reporting requirements, and we see the opportunity to say, all right, let's agree a best practice on how we report that is consistent with the expected outcome that they want. Use CDM as that description and automated solution, and then push it to them using that taxonomy so it's completely.
Okay, so they're talking about the CDM, which is the common domain model. Okay, which is, think about that as like somebody at the top, like like if you look at a body, it's the head, and it sends the signals down to everything else. Well, everybody's connected to that head. All these ISA partners are going to be connected to that head, right? They're all going to have an arm and a leg. And what happens is now when rules like the DRR, which are the regulatory reporting rules that he's talking about that are all getting pushed down, which is the stuff that we've been excited for the past couple of years, right? When things get approved, those rules are going to basically, the system is so difficult right now to implement that it's old and outdated, like they've been saying. It's just hard to make sure everybody is all on the same page all at the same time. So when they push this now through that head, think of it like automated. Everybody that's under that system and under that body gets pushed those rules. So the idea is that so they don't have to worry about it and they can do business as usual. And then from a regulatory standpoint, it's like we know that everybody's going to be abiding by these rules because it's got pushed down from the top. There's no way to avoid it. It's built in, if that makes sense.
Consistent. And then we adjust it for every different regime or jurisdiction. The other area that we're really interested in, and happy to take your feedback on either one of these, but processes to manage the exchange of collateral. We've got the initial margin requirements for non-cleared trades. The collateral life cycle is about as antiquated as anything and falls into the area that I described, highly manual, not very automated, can be moving much more rapidly. And one area that I think we've thought about in the blockchain is this payments area, and which is what collateral is, right? And the payments. So what do you think about the collateral space and how that could be innovated?
Yeah, I'll take both of them, and I think they're both great use cases. If you think about reg reporting, I think that it's an interesting thing that happens in financial services and other industries where two counterparties come to an agreement on a trade or a transaction. And really, you have at that point of time the best piece of information. And what ends up happening is that once that trade was consummated, effectuated, and was confirmed to both parties, a lot of things then happen based on what both parties think they have agreed during that trade. And I'm saying deliberately think, because the reason there are breaks and issues in the industry is because we all know that not everything gets processed correctly after the fact. And I think that that's a big missed opportunity because at one moment of time, you have the source of truth when those two parties have come together. When you start thinking about reg reporting, I mean, it's a great example. I can't necessarily state factually, but I remember hearing from a few sources that a bunch of the issues with reg reporting is not lack of reporting, but it's lack of reporting accurately with the right format at the right time. And to me, that's really not what reg reporting was trying to do. It was trying to bring visibility into activity that happens in the market. If you start thinking about, for example, OTC derivatives, if they traded via smart contracts, why isn't the reg reporting just a feature that when a trade gets consummated, a reg reporting just automatically gets reported from that one source of truth in a very standardized fashion at the time that the trade happened?
One source of truth, okay? So what they're saying is, and this is what Bigham's and I've been talking about with these backroom handshake deals, right? They both are pushing forward their truth, their idea of what they just agreed upon. And again, it may not even be that people are trying to do nefarious things, but that's what opens the door for nefarious shit to happen. When you got one firm reporting this and you got another firm reporting that, right? And so the shit gets colluded, right? And that's basically what they're saying. There's all this room for the error, so it makes sense that these numbers, collateral management people are really, we think that maybe should be margin called, that we're like, how the hell are they staying in business? How does this keep happening? I mean, because they have a revolving door. It's like they're even ahead of the collateral system. I'm sure that they're banking on the fact that this is slow and outdated, and they're kind of just outpacing it. I hope that makes sense.
Take it even one step further, I think that I see a future where regulators will own or have nodes in some of these networks and actually be able to see real-time regulatory reporting being transmitted to them. When you start thinking about volumes and complexity of markets, that's really what I think you would want from your regulator, is to be able to regulate markets when things happen, where I would say that for the most part today, the capability is really just to regulate post fact when things happen, and generally speaking, with great latency. And I'm saying latency not in seconds, minutes, hours, but probably days, weeks, even months or years. And I think that that's a big opportunity. We had conversations with regulators on a very similar topic. And I think that it's a great opportunity. And I think that OTC derivatives, again, or any other type of derivative trade that can be represented as a smart contract, could actually show the benefits of the technology, but also just give regulators a good tool to be a proactive regulator in real time rather than post fact. So that's on the regulatory reporting. I don't know if there's anything you would like to add to that.
I think that covered it. Let's move to collateral.
So if you think about crypto markets, how they started, they were very isolated liquidity centers. So if you were a global player that wanted to trade on a lot of these venues, you effectively had to collateralize yourself in every venue. And we all know, I would assume that most of the listeners on this podcast are aware of financial services and how they operate for the most part.
Except for my mother. She's an ardent listener, but I'll explain it to her later.
Your mother,
Yeah,
but we'll explain later, is really that, as a financial institution, your financial performance has to do a lot with how well you manage your collateral, how efficient you use your liquidity in global markets. And in crypto, if you wanted to have, just making up an example, a $50 million trading ability in every trading venue, because you didn't know where liquidity would be at any given point in time. And let's just assume that there were 5 major liquidity centers for crypto. You had to have $250 million of collateral, because that was the only way. There was no way of moving collateral across these venues in an efficient way. You had to go to fiat, use international payments, which we know are not really real time or efficient. And that was the way to do it. And then came this amazing innovation of a stable coin, which really said, let's just digitize collateral, aka dollars, and make this thing called a stable coin, which we are seeing now has grabbed the front lines with what happened with Terra Luna, but we can talk about that later. But really gave the ability for trading companies or investors to say, okay, you know what, I really need to have $10-20 million liquidity in every venue to be able to react in real time. But the rest, the $30 million that I want to have as a limit, I will have that floating as a stable coin that I could actually move almost in real time between these trading venues. And I think that if you now bring that to the world of financial services and you think about collateral, generally speaking, I think that the opportunity is massive. I think that we're seeing the proposal from FTX, and I'm not here to judge if it's good or bad, but to me, what's more interesting about that proposal is the fact that they have the ability to even do that, right? The ability to call in margin every 30 seconds, right? The fact that
Bro, I've been saying on Twitter, I've been telling people that Sam is an OG. He's the CEO of FTX. He is a one of a kind dude, and I think that he understands these markets in a way to make it fair for everybody. And I've been saying good things about FTX. What this guy just highlighted, and this guy worked for Citadel before, that they are saying that they're proposing that they can do this. They have the technology to bring this DLT, this ledger, to in real time, can be able to do this tracking on a ledger using blockchain. It's pretty amazing stuff, guys. I mean, this would be, in a way, a huge change for us in a great way. And when I say us, I mean not even just apes that are in AMC, GameStop, our beloved stocks, but I mean just retail for the future.
Is that capability. I don't know if 30 seconds is the right time, or it should be 5 minutes or twice a day. But the fact that they can call on that margin in real time, to me, is very powerful, because we know that markets will have their average behavior on a day-to-day basis, but then there's going to be shocks to the system. And wouldn't it be great at times of high volatility or high risk in the system, that you could actually call on collateral in real time. So that's what, from one area, from a risk mitigation perspective, I think there's a massive advantage there. But I also think that for global players, your ability to manage collateral globally and being able to move it between your legal entities or fund initial margin, variation margin globally in real time is going to create a significant efficiency to global players and is going to reduce risk from the system, risk of default, which honestly sometimes will be because you just couldn't move collateral on time due to operational inefficiency within the organization, and not really because you didn't have the collateral. And that is not good. That's really not the intent of those things. So I think I see a massive opportunity for financial services in that respect. I think another interesting angle on collateral is that when you think about the ability to optimize collateral and to think, like, I actually think that if you start thinking about smart contracts representing the model of how and what collateral is eligible, think about putting the eligibility schedule within a smart contract. And now you could in real time know that what you're submitting, and now you could actually have AI tools that could look at all of these smart contracts, look at all of your inventory, know that they can fund everything in real time, have all of the eligibility schedules all mapped out. I think the opportunity is, to be honest, kind of hard to even imagine how big it is. So I think you started with two use cases that are ambitious. I think they're big, but I think have quite a tremendous opportunity.
Well, let me again plug the CDM, because we have mapped, using the common domain model, eligible collateral schedules for initial margin. And now we're prepared to push that out into the market so people can use those to begin to automate. And we see it the same way you do, right? How do you optimize cheapest to deliver? What's in your inventory? What do you have with your counterparty? All of those things really matter. So there's a lot of potential to really automate that process and do so in real time. So that's quite exciting. We talked a little bit about the smart contracts and the interface between the distributed ledger. Probably requires the 101 basics here. How much smart contract can you actually, or do you want to put on the ledger itself as kind of the level one operating rule book? How do you think about that from a technology standpoint? You and your team are obviously thinking about that every single day.
I would say that you would want to put it all, as much information. And I think that the issue is not the want. It's the problem currently with all of these, at least public chains and even some of the private chains, is that if you're not capable of solving to the highest level of security and privacy properties that are needed, you start running into a lot of issues. And that's why what you're seeing in most public chains is really just a representation of a bare instrument that is effectively an IOU token to someone's private system that is not on chain. It's an incremental improvement to today's world, but it's really kind of missing the mark from my perspective. I think that the opportunity is if there was a chain or a network that could adhere to highest level of privacy, meaning the right entities could see the right information, you have the right authorization level, but also data locality rules. I mean, the world is not homogeneous. And I think that a lot of times people look at Bitcoin as kind of the inspiration, but forget that Bitcoin is just one use case. Bitcoin did not try to solve financial systems. It tried to create a bare instrument that is censorship resistance, anti-inflationary. That's the use case. So when you think about your members that are working on industries that span geographical locations, that span regulatory regimes, the world is not homogeneous. And I think one of the biggest issue in public chains is they effectively say, you either accept our rules or you don't. And I think that that's why it ends up happening is that what gets stored on chain has to be so minimal that you can't trigger any of those things. And I think that that misses the mark quite significantly. So back to your original question, if there was something that could adhere to GDPR, data locality, highest level of privacy, I would say at that point, put as much data on chain, because then you don't have to deal with all the reconciliation or all the lack of trust issues that you would have in the alternative, which is most of the critical information will still be left off chain.
I had a debate with a friend about this permissioned and non-permissioned or open. So on the collateral question, so you got these stable coins. Why would you want to reinvent that? Use asset-backed stable coins, and those are open, whether it's Circle or any of these others. But then you kind of make an argument, which I think is probably closely aligned to how the industry thinks about it, a permissioned ledger, which you want to have all the right features, and you're not just going to put it on Ether, blockchain, or Bitcoin networks. So you're going to want something more permission, but that's going to take, somebody's got to run that. Somebody's got to operate that. So how do you think about these relationships and then, mixing chains or, crossing chains is always a challenge.
Well, maybe there should be an alternative that says that there could be a public chain that gives you all of the properties that I have shared. I mean, why only a private chain has the privacy properties? I don't think that that is or should be the case. I think that that's what the industry got used to, that if you're in the public chain, everything has to be public. I think that that's just not true. If you think about the internet, everybody thinks about the internet as a public network, right? Everybody can connect to the internet. But you still have a website. When you go to the ISDA website and you have the member portal, well, you need to have credentials to go through that portal. Not everybody has access to it, even though the internet is a public network, where if you go to CNN.com, their business model is no, all the information should be available to everyone because we make money from commercials. But they live on the same network, right? So to me, I think that the actual opportunity is really to have a public network, a public chain, because there's shortcomings to private chains, not when it comes to privacy and scale, but actually more to deployment, maintenance. How do you get people on top of it? If you could create a public chain that could meet, and we believe that you can create a public chain that could meet the privacy rules, data locality rules, and fine-grained controls of different types of applications to run on it, then I think that that's the holy grail. That's the opportunity, right? So that's how we think about it. There are shortcomings to private chains. It's not that they are just better.
So let me ask a quick legal question. When we think about putting everything on chain, some of the legal questions around smart contracts, are smart contracts law? Is code law? You're used to having your bank account with your assets in there, or at least somebody registering that those assets are there, and you've got a claim to that. We want to make sure that these contracts hold up in law and the assets are where you expect them to be, or if something does fail, what is your recourse for collecting on that? If you're sending a trade or collateral between here and Singapore and the ones and the zeros somehow don't show up, or you lose your key, or whatever the things that can go wrong on a blockchain, what is the legal recourse? Where are we at today, and what should we be thinking about going forward? These are some of the questions we've asked. We've produced some papers on this, kind of posing these important legal questions. Am I overthinking it or underthinking?
These are really good questions from this gentleman.
I think that you're not overthinking the topics in the context of how the industry itself was educating and discussing a lot of these topics. And there were many aspects of what you just said. So I'll try to break it into chunks. If you go back to Bitcoin tried to create a bearer instrument in a digital form. Therefore, your keys are your assets. Makes sense. Let's just take another example. If you were to tokenize real estate and I owned 4 floors, maybe in my future life when I have money, of the World Trade Center, did I lose my keys? That's it. There's no ownership of those 4 floors. That's nonsensical, right? And I think on issuer type assets that have an issuer, your keys are your asset, just is nonsensical to me. That to me makes no sense. But let's park that aside. I think that there were other things that you started talking. Code is law. The funny part.
Okay, so he's right about that. Like that is like, so if if he owned 4 floors of property, okay, and or real estate, and because you lost your keys, all of a sudden you don't have the ownership. There does have to be something on the top level that registers that, hey, like he mentioned with the bank, that this is the owner of this property.
Is that a lot of the people that were drumming code is law, and then lost a lot of money in crypto because there was a vulnerability in the code, are now in the legal system trying to resolve their cases. So clearly, when the rubber hit the road, if you lose money, suddenly you go back to the judicial system to try to resolve your issue. But I actually think that the interesting thing is that code could make the law more clear, right? I think about it no different than DNA, right? What did DNA do? It just gave better proof of what happened. So I think that if you keep a record of a swap trade on paper and you write it, and you had a verbal agreement, and one piece of paper got wet and the ink got smudged, and it's not very clear. Well, it's hard to prove what happened.
Which is where we're at right now, right? I think there's a lot of papers getting wet, getting drink spilt on them and shit. Like, it's literally where I think how this derivative market has gotten so out of control and wonky.
Right? So I do think that code can make the law easier, right? You have a much more factual way to evidence what actually happened. And therefore, I believe that this opportunity with this technology and smart contracts actually will make the law easier to enforce, because things will be significantly more deterministic and there will be less room for interpretation. So that's just my view about code is law. I don't think that smart contracts and blockchain technology circumvent the judicial system. I'm not a believer in that. There's things that countries consider as part of their sovereignty, and I would say that the judicial system is one of them. And I don't think that this technology is going to circumvent that. I don't think that this technology should be any different than any other technology. I find it a bit amusing why this technology have brought so much regulatory attention to. From my perspective, and all of the clients that we work with today, which is more than 40 clients that are all heavily regulated, I don't see why this technology cannot operate within existing regulatory regimes. I just don't. There are interesting business ideas, as we talked about earlier, like tokenized collateral, that you want to have regulatory clarity how this new asset that you have created, because you are creating a new asset, what would be the treatment of that asset? So I understand why you would want to have regulatory clarity with respect to that. But I don't.
In my opinion, as much as people like to think that, that they're going to use, I've heard people come up with a theory that we're going to get paid out in some sort of token and not the US dollar, et cetera, et cetera. I think that this is more where it's going for when we're talking about like tokenized money, is for used for much more of like a collateral purpose, right? Where they can switch between different liquidity pools. That money's easily exchanged between them. It doesn't not done on a paper basis where if you want to withdraw your money, it could take 24 hours to get it wired from the bank. Then you have to go put it in somewhere else, wire it to another bank. All that costs money. So I think that that's really the goal for some sort of digital tokenized form of collateral, basically.
See why this technology should invalidate existing regulation, cross-border, GDPR, all of those things. I actually think that you should be able, and I think that the technology allows you to operate within these regulatory constraints.
I think a lot of people have come to that same conclusion, and they are looking for the regulatory certainty. Now, if you're in Twitter sphere, there's plenty of people talking about how this is going to break and change. So you haven't convinced everybody of that yet, but I think many of the people serving kind of the largest institutions and certainly the largest players in the crypto space are definitely looking for that regulatory certainty and not trying to break it.
Yeah, and I'll take it one step further. Someone once told me, because when I started the company, I was a bit naive. It's like, oh, we'll just need to have this law passed and this regulatory. And someone told me, if you're building a business counting on regulation to change to make your business model work, think of a new business to start, right? And I'm not saying that dissing regulators. I'm just saying they are busy. Generally speaking, do not have the budgets that companies such as ourselves or other big companies out there have. And you just can't rely on regulation to change in order to prove that a technology has capability. And that's why I always advocate work on things that work within the regulatory regime, and at the same time educate regulators. Like we said, reg reporting, tokenized collateral, those type of things, ask for regulatory clarity. But I think that there's just plenty to do without it.
I'd like to turn for a moment to discuss digital assets, work with market infrastructure and ASX. You guys have been a partner with that and proceeding with a on-exchange exchange, I guess, or on-chain exchange is probably the better way to put it. How's that going? And also, maybe can you reflect on where you think the rest of the market is? Kind of taking those traditional infrastructures, where are we going to be in 5 years?
Yeah, so I'll start from the end and go towards the front of the question. So first of all, like I said, I mean, we're working with 40, I would say, global organizations as of today. For the most part, I would say 85% of our clients are all within financial services. We're also in healthcare, insurance, sports wagering now, and even have a government agency that is using the technology. So I would actually say that the trend is heading in the right direction. I will also say that I was recently in Davos, and I was in one of the talks by a global system integrator. When you hear their top priority in 2022 is moving to the cloud. And I guess the point that I'm trying to make by that is not to say that it's comical. It's just to understand. And I would say that the pitch of cloud to me is so much more trivial. So much more trivial. The fact that in 2022, number one priority is still migration to the cloud just means that moving financial infrastructure to new technology, and I'm not going to call cloud new technology, takes time. It takes time.
Yeah. So and that's where we'll end it pretty much because I think you guys got the gist of it. So the system, and this is the people that this is, the derivatives market, guys. It's slow, it's antiquated. There's lots of room for confusion. People can fumble the bags, done off of fax machines. And there's trillions of dollars that flow into this. So being that we're in the position that we're at, I think, again, seeing things like, hey, possible, ledger coming to the financial markets and crypto, for the derivative crypto market is a really big thing, right? We know that the big institutions are coming to crypto, and if something like this happens, is actually put into play, I think that's better overall for us. What is more exciting to me than the crypto stuff, though, is it coming to, the security markets. They talked about FTX. They're going to be, they've demonstrated they have the capability to do this and propose that they can. So that'll be something to look out for. Point being, though, we are getting fucked by a bunch of guys who are still using fax machines to get deals done. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. It was long. I just feel like education is power. You guys understanding the people that we're up against and how mistakes happen, quote, and I'm air quoting the word mistakes. Anyways, I love you long time. Peace.